Hello and welcome to the 8th ever episode of the Unsigned Manager podcast. My name is Siji Kolawole, and each week I take a look at football's key topics, stories, events, and try and break them down and analyse to see what's actually happened. So in this episode I want to take a look at arguably the biggest scandal in football history, a conspiracy which placed a permanent black mark on Italian football forever, the event which changed the course of Serie A history. I want to take a look at the Calciopoli scandal. So let's get into the episode. Okay, so a little bit of background information. So I grew up during the rise and the peak of the Premier League. Every week, Rooney and Ronaldo were banging. Drogba's dominating backlines. Terry and Ferdinand are the best defenders in the league. Frank Lampard can score 20 a season at any time. And as time passed on from that era, the new stars of the game emerged, like Sergio Aguero, Eden Hazard, Virgil van Dijk. But the Premier League of today was built off the back of the generation before, which is logical really, because it provides history and context to rivalries, performances, and it's why things matter. So as a younger fan, one of the first things you hear from any cultured football fan older than you is that peak Italian football, that's the level. That's the standard. That's what league campaigns should look like. That period of football in Italian football is called the Seven Sisters, where from the mid-80s to 2006, 7 different teams won Serie A, and it is where the best players played, where the most revolutionary tactics were born. And you see how today people say, yeah, he might be a good player, but can he make it in the Prem? We hear that a lot this year with Timo Werner and Kai Havertz. Yeah, they're good players, but the Prem's different. That's what Serie A was. Between 1980 and 2007, only 2 of the 27 Ballon d'Or winners, which is an award given to the best player in the world, only 2 of those players never played in Serie A. Between 1983 and 2003, Serie A clubs made the Champions League final 13 times, winning 6 of them. From Maradona to Van Basten to George Weah, R9, Zidane, players really had to prove themselves in that talent-filled league. But over 1 year that bubble burst. Suddenly the top players in the world staved off Serie A, moving over to Spain and England and Germany. The Italian league was blackballed for a period, and people didn't want their reputations impacted by the dark hearts happening in Italy. And that was Calciopoli. Alright, let's set the scene. It's the penultimate day of the 04-05 season in Serie A. The title is still not decided. It's 5 days before the famous Istanbul Champions League game, so AC Milan have put out a weakened lineup to rest some of their players in preparation for Liverpool. Milan are away at Palermo, needing a win to stay in the race and on the heels of long-time rivals Juventus. But heartbreak for Milan, a 79th minute equaliser from Simone Baron brought the game back level, and Juventus were crowned Italian champions once again. Juventus finished with 91 points that year and 3 points ahead of AC Milan off the back of Trezeguet and Del Piero's combined 35 goals in the league, but was supported by key players Gigi Buffon, Cannavaro, Thuram and Zlatan Ibrahimovic. This was meant to be Juventus' 28th league championship, but soon enough the league title would be stripped from Juve, as the Calciopoli scandal dominated the front, the back, the inside and the outside of all Italian newspapers, especially Gazzetta dello Sport, which will be important later. Alright, so for those of you actually wondering what is Calciopoli, essentially it was a match-fixing syndicate organised by key members of Italian football clubs, Juventus, AC Milan, Fiorentina and Lazio, to influence games in their favour. But rather than outright decide the result of the games beforehand, these clubs pressured referees to act in their favour during matches to secure results. The scandal was uncovered, funnily enough, because of more Juventus cheating. In the 1990s, a Juve club doctor was found guilty of providing players with performance-enhancing drugs, which led the club's upper management having their phones tapped. If you've ever seen The Wire or any police show, it's exactly like that. Someone's recording their phone calls and just making sure what's happening is legit. But of course it wasn't. As a result, the transcripts of the wiretaps implicated AC Milan, Lazio and Fiorentina. So it wasn't that Juve didn't deserve some type of punishment. They had just got caught via other wrongdoing. These transcripts were then posted in Italy's most famous newspaper, Gazzetta dello Sport, which apparently even the old women in the market wanted to read about the scandal, with the sales of the newspaper rising by 50,000 copies a day. So with Juventus, for example, this is how the organisation worked for them. General Manager Luciano Moggi and Chief Exec Antonio Girardo conspired with Italian referees associations to make sure that the men officiating Juventus's games were ones that they liked, and that they were referees they thought would be more favourable to Juventus in 50-50 situations. And you gotta think, this is way back before VAR and goal line technology and all that stuff. And in those days, the referee's word was final. There was no way to argue with him because there was no other equipment to show him that he was wrong. So if you could employ a few crooked referees and make sure that they were favourable to Juve, no one would be able to argue with it. So Moggi and Girardo could almost guarantee wins for Juve. A bit of background on Luciano Moggi. At the time of the scandal, he was the most powerful man in Italian football, with some people going as far as calling him the god of the sport in Italy, with others even thinking that there wasn't a transfer in Italy that could happen without his approval. Other notable Moggi scandals were pressuring the host of Italy's most popular football show to speak positively about Juventus at all time. Moggi also owned a football agency called GEA World, which was heavily assumed to be a corrupt enterprise. One of the things they did was tell players to play worse to lower their transfer value. For example, Zlatan Ibrahimovic at Ajax, so that Juventus could sign the player for cheaper. Moggi isn't exactly the cleanest character, and this scandal really didn't do much to tidy his reputation. The system worked like this. Moggi and Girardo call senior referee executives, like a guy called Parito or Vice President Mazzini, to suggest which referee should officiate Juventus games. Those referee executives, basically referee pickers, then select the official for that game and tell him to call it Juventus's way. If a referee didn't call it Juve's way, Moggi told the referee picker to never select him for a Juve game again, or to convince them to be crooked. So that way Juventus could have a pool of referees, in the end after weeding out the good ones, that they could use for all of their games. And this is why Pierluigi Collina is so respected in Italian football. And if you don't know who he is by name, you'll know him as the scary, bold Italian referee who takes no nonsense and he has massive eyes. He's so respected because Moggi could never pressure or persuade him to not call the game objectively because he wasn't crooked. Moggi had to go as far as making sure all referee executives knew never to pick Collina for Juventus's games because he would never cheat. Important point, big important point, Moggi never actually spoke to referees himself. It was always through someone else. He never spoke to them directly. It's a small difference, but it's a big legal difference, but we'll get into that later. Moggi and Girardo always called the referee pickers and they spoke to the referees. It was never direct. So at this point, you're thinking, pretty easy. These clubs are guilty as charged. This looks like an open and shut case of cheating. Not that difficult. The head of the Italian FA resigns as president due to all the corruption, which makes sense. Juventus's entire board of directors resigned, which is funny, I can't imagine that boardroom. And Moggi also resigned quickly after the 2006 league win because of the allegations. So like I said at the beginning, I grew up in the rise of the Premier League era. So when this was happening between 2004 and 2006, there was no way I would have really known what was happening. I wasn't as informed a fan, I was a young kid. So all the research I did on this was after the fact, which sometimes is easier and sometimes it's much better because it means you're looking at stuff with fresh eyes and you want to see what doesn't stand out to you properly. I want to know why Juventus were punished much more than every other club. We'll get into the punishments later, but for everything that Juventus had to go through, it's surprising that other clubs got off so easy. The other thing that didn't make sense is, on what planet is legal evidence allowed to be posted in the most famous newspaper in the country before it's ever seen a court? That doesn't really make sense. And if you didn't think that this was convoluted enough before, it's about to get so much more messy. So let's try and do this as clearly as possible. When things go wrong for someone, often it means something is going right for someone else. You know that old phrase people say that when one door closes, another one opens? Yeah, that door's not normally for you, it's for someone else. Between 1988 and 2004, so including that famous Seven Sisters period where 7 different teams won Serie A, 5 of those wins went to Juventus, and 7 went to bitter crosstown rivals AC Milan. So Inter Milan had spent big trying to catch up with their rivals, signing well-known players like R9, Christian Vieri, Dennis Bergkamp, Andrea Pirlo, Clarence Seedorf, Roberto Baggio all came into the club. Inter Milan were trying their hardest to become dominant in Serie A, but it just wasn't good enough. They couldn't match the shrewd, intelligent transfer moves made by Juve, or the dominance of Milan, and R9 was getting injured. It just didn't work out for them. And so it seems that Inter president Massimo Moratti decided to take on his 2 biggest rivals and knock them down a peg by putting them in hot water off the pitch. Follow this chain of events. Moratti, Inter president, and Inter shareholder and loyal fan Tronchetti conspired to illegally record conversations between rival club management. This was possible since Tronchetti was the owner of Telecom Italia and TIM, who were the largest telephone companies in the country. That's like being the head of O2 and Vodafone. These 2 guys were so close, Tronchetti and Moratti, that Tronchetti's tyre company, Pirelli Tyres, was Inter Milan's kit sponsor. Their plan was to hand the tapes over to the courts, which could then be used to sanction the clubs and put Inter in a better position to win. However, the courts they went to, and they tried loads, in Turin, in Rome, in Naples, all found that there was no wrongdoing on the tapes. Juve and AC Milan presidents weren't doing anything wrong, and the club said, this is all fine. So instead, the tapes were given to the newspapers. Which newspapers? Corriere dello Sport, Controcampo, Messaggero, and Gazzetta dello Sport, due to the connections Inter Milan had with the people running these papers. For example, Inter's former vice president owns Gazzetta dello Sport, which is well known in Italy to basically be a mouthpiece for Inter Milan. Now this method worked. The media pressure and the fan anger and the intrigue caused the Italian FA to open a serious investigation into the dodgy dealings at these clubs. But then more shady things happened, and they were all happening on Inter Milan's side. Guido Rossi was selected to run the investigation into the match fixing allegations, and he was given the authority to basically handpick the jury on the case. Funny thing is, Guido Rossi slightly forgot to mention that he was a major investor in Inter Milan, and he used to work at the club with President Moratti. So unsurprisingly, the Inter Milan man Rossi found all the clubs guilty, handed out severe punishment, especially to Juventus, who caught the brunt of the consequences, but we'll get onto that in a minute. So again, just to make sure we're on track, the president of Inter Milan, the owner of the company who recording the match-fixing wiretaps, the newspaper which made all the information public, and the guy who handed down the punishment are all highly intertwined, long-standing friends, and would do anything to see Inter Milan be successful. Now it makes sense why Juventus was stripped of the 04-05 title, and it was awarded to Inter Milan. It also makes sense why Inter were never found guilty of any wrongdoing, even though it seems unfathomable that they weren't engaging in this as well. And there's more to this. Guido Rossi was only appointed to lead the investigation because the AC Milan chairman had a conflict of interest since AC were accused of match fixing. However, Rossi never declared his conflict. So after the investigation was over, Rossi went to work for Telecom Italia, the company which recorded the wiretaps in the first place, and was run by his friend. Going through the punishments on the case, you can see Juventus' case on why they feel like they were screwed, because The media scrutiny and the fan anger caused by the newspaper leaking meant that the Italian FA's prosecutor, Stefano Palazzi, wanted to make sure that nothing like this ever happened again. Juventus were relegated to Serie B and had to start the Serie B campaign with -9 points. Stripped of the 04-05 season and the 05-06 season given to second place Inter. Fiorentina had -15 points at the start of next season, out of the Champions League for that year and 2 home games behind closed doors. AC Milan -8 points for the start of next season, 1 home game behind closed doors. Lazio -3 points at the start of next season, out of the Europa League for that year, 2 home games behind closed doors. Juventus were relegated, and the rest of these teams are getting, oh, you can't play in that competition for a year. AC Milan, in the year that this year they got -8 points in Serie A, went on to win the Champions League that year. Juventus are thinking, what is happening here? Why are we getting screwed? And yeah, they were highly frustrated with the punishments, and they tried to appeal their case and fight it, but FIFA shut that down straight away. FIFA said they had the option to stop all Italian football for the time being, including the national team, and they would do so. They'd be happy to do so if Juve appealed. So they had no choice but to take the punishment. As well as that, Juventus were further punished with many of their top players leaving because they didn't want to play in an inferior league at a club with a tarnished reputation. So it makes sense now. Juve are thinking, we've been relegated, we got star players, they don't want to be here. We're getting points deductions in our relegation season, so they don't even want us to come back up. It's like they're trying to get rid of us. Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Patrick Vieira left for Inter Milan. Emerson left for Real Madrid, Zambrotta for Barcelona, Mutu for Fiorentina, Cannavaro for Real Madrid, who became a Ballon d'Or winner that year, and Lilian Thuram for Barcelona. So from an Inter Milan perspective, they've taken 2 of their rival star players, they've caused more to leave. Their rival team right now, who's dominating, is relegated, and it doesn't look like they're going to come back up that year. Inter Milan are on their way to taking over Serie A. And even further than that, because of the case, Moggi received a 5-year ban from football and a 4-month prison sentence. Gerardo also received a 5-year ban and 3 months in prison, with similar bans to referee executives Parito and Mazzini, the referee pickers. A few years later, things got a bit more troubling for Inter. Between 2008 and 2011, in the criminal trial against Moggi, Moggi brought up another set of wiretaps between deceased former Inter chairman Facchetti, current president Moratti, 2 specific referee pickers, and the referee. And do you remember when I said that Moggi never actually spoke to a referee himself? That's because doing that takes the crime to a different level. In this trial, the police officer whose job it was to write down exactly what was said in the wiretaps said under oath that he was ordered to concentrate on only Juventus's wrongdoings and forget any wiretap information said about Inter Milan. These new revelations caused a new federal prosecutor to find Inter Milan guilty on match fixing and attempted match fixing charges. But guess what? The statute had run out on the case because it was over 5 years old, so Inter Milan were in the clear. Nothing could happen to them, untouchable. Ironically, the new case, the new prosecutor's case, found that the Calciopoli seasons, which was 04-05 and 05-06, the first year, 04-05, was legitimate, fair. Juventus never match fixed in that season. Essentially, Juve was stripped of a title where no wrongdoing was found, and Inter were handed a title the next year even though they were just as bad and had covered it up. Moratti was able to mastermind a situation where 2 of his biggest rivals were punished, one of them so heavily. Their reputations were damaged. I'm not sure Juve will ever be able to shake off Calciopoli. Ever. I think people don't really trust Italian football now because of that. Even now, when I was growing up, I wasn't even there at the time, but you hear, oh, you know, it's like over there, and it's not always. I don't think Inter will ever shake that off. It opened the door for Inter to dominate the Serie A for the next few years. When Ibra left Juventus for Inter, he then won the next 3 league titles at Inter. Inter did this by leaning on their network and orchestrating the evidence and the executioner so that they can control both. The new case also found out that all the incriminating phone calls Inter Milan had found were not admissible because they were found on Swiss phone cards, so none of this should have happened in the first place. They then shared that illegally obtained information in public newspapers, lied about their own involvement in the process, lied about their previous attempts to do what others were accused of, just to get their rivals punished and take control of the league. And the sad thing about this is, it hurt Serie A. All the stars of the game left. Now, if you look at the Italian league today, think about the level of quality. If you make like an all-star team, let's say you do it like an NBA all-star team style, take all the league's best players. In the Premier League, you can argue that those players will come from 4 or 5 teams, maybe. Spain, you might get 3 or 4. Germany, you might get 3 or 4. Italian football, other than Inter Milan last year, you probably only, the whole 11 would just be a Juventus 11. You've damaged the league. The league isn't as legitimate. No one really cares anymore. There's not that level of excitement because we're not even sure. You put a stain on the league and it's hurt the players in there and it's hurt the quality of the league. And I want to know if I could go back in time and ask President Moratti, does he think it was worth it? Does he think it was worth it to create this entire plan? And don't get me wrong, Juventus were guilty too. 05-06 that season they were guilty. Lazio, Milan, Fiorentina. It's terrible from all of them. Going that far, I think they ruined the spirit of the sport, and that's what they were charged on. They were all charged on unsportsmanlike conduct. But I want to know really, really, honestly and truly, would they do it again? Would they go that far again? Knowing the impact it's had on the league now, when Italian football went through that dry period, I want to know if they think it was worth it. And if something like that happened in the Premier League, I actually have no idea what the Premier League would do. If they found that Manchester United were doing that, do you think they'd relegate them? I'm not sure that they would. I think that's why it even seems more suspect to me that Juve got relegated, because Juve are the most famous team in that league, either them or AC Milan. It seems more calculated and more unrealistic that they actually would relegate them, which is why it didn't make sense to me why they were so heavily punished. If they relegated all of them, all 4 clubs, okay, then yeah, I think you're doing a big, we're getting this out of the game. But only one of them? Anyway, just like the last couple of episodes, I really enjoyed going back and doing research on something I thought I knew about. I thought that this was just, people paying off refs, easy stuff, not that difficult. This is a nationwide conspiracy by a football club and all the most powerful men involved in that club to almost destroy a league to win it. Moggi and Gerardo, guilty. Everyone involved in the Inter Milan setup, guilty. The other 3 clubs, guilty. If you're Sampdoria, you're thinking, what's happening here? It's more interesting to go back and learn about that kind of stuff because you miss so much in the game. There's so many things happen in football at all times. It is nice to make sure you catch up on everything and you know what's happening. Lastly, just before I go, Euros group stage is pretty much done. I think the Euros group stage finished a couple of days ago. As of right now, my picks aren't looking strong. I had Gnabry for top goal scorer. It looks like Lukaku or Ronaldo will run away with that if they get that far. Netherlands look much better than I thought they would. Much, much better. Gini Wijnaldum, respect, I apologise. I have said a lot of bad things about Wijnaldum in the past. I thought he was just an energy box merchant. I thought that if anyone had any good fitness, they could be Gini Wijnaldum. Turns out, phenomenal creator. More like a Thomas Muller role where he can drop into space and pull and do this and that. Levels, good team. I'm not sure how far they'll get. I think England could still beat Netherlands. But I think that side of the bracket is looking interesting. France, slightly underwhelming. I think the idea of that France team is like almost too much to handle, and I don't think I was thinking about them in an actual tactical point of view. I think, they've got loads of great players, just stuff them together would be great. I don't think it really worked like that. But Paul Pogba, sensational. Pogba's passing levels. He put on the clinic. The through ball to Mbappe over like 20 yards, splitting 2 defensive lines at once, crazy. I think England have been okay. The I don't have the same love for Jack Grealish. I think everyone else does, but it's undeniable the difference in that Czech Republic first half to the Scotland game and the Croatia game. Grealish is scary. I think it's because England don't actually have that. Well, they have Sancho, but they're not playing him. England don't have that many players who actually take players on one on one. Raheem Sterling doesn't really take people on one on one. He more finds gaps, finds space, gets to the byline, but doesn't really. He won't beat someone all game long. Mason Mount is more driving into space and giving the ball off. But playing Saka and Grealish, you want to get at people. Terrifying. Something's wrong with Kane. Not sure is what it is really. I'm not. I'm never really petrified of Harry Kane's not scoring, because one day he'll wake up and everything will be fine and goalkeepers will be wetting themselves. I think Grealish has to play now. I think the idea of Mount or someone else wide isn't worth it. Play someone that's going to commit people. I think he'll do the defensive work. In the Czech game, there was one time where England lost the ball in a counter attack, and Grealish could have easily stood there and left it, and he chased back 20 yards, made half the tackle, like almost stopped him, and then Sterling blitzed by him and cleaned out the guy. And between the two of them, I was thinking, this looks fine. England could be more than fine with this. Last play that really impressed me, Renato Sanchez. I had completely forgotten about him. Completely forgotten. Renato Sanchez at the last Euros was the guy. Cool, real promising. Then no minutes at Bayern, tough time at Swansea, and I had literally forgotten about him. Dropped off my mind. And then Portugal were playing with two defensive midfield players, and they are so boring together. They're the worst things in football. Carvalho and Pereira are both fine players. They're not terrible. They do whatever. But together with them, you get no forward movement. And if you play both of them, you have less creative players on the pitch. So Portugal are playing with two like does the job stalwart defenders and defensive midfield players, but not adding enough creativity to get rid of that. Renato Sanchez is breaking through lines, carrying the ball forward, winning it back in high areas. He's like Tottenham's Moussa Dembele. He's like a more attacking version of that Moussa Dembele. And I didn't really catch a lot of French football this year. Obviously, I know Lille won the league, but I can't say I really saw them play a lot. So Sanchez, again, just wasn't in my mind. But I don't see why a midfield three of... I prefer Pereira to William Carvalho. Of Pereira, Bruno and Sanchez wouldn't work. It doesn't make sense to me why that doesn't work. You get defensive work from both the attacking midfielders and Pereira. You get Sanchez carrying the ball forward by feet. You get Bruno moving it by air. You get long shots. You get creativity. You get good final third passing. I don't see why Portugal's manager won't play both of them. My aim, in tournaments like this would be, if I have a goal scorer like a Lukaku or a Ronaldo or a Harry Kane, what I want is to build the entire team around how can I get them a chance. And if you have players on the bench, like what is that manager doing, taking off players like Bruno and Bernardo Silva against Germany to bring on João Moutinho? What are you doing? Bruno's topping goals and assists. Get your most creative players in a game like that on the pitch so that your number 9 can get as many chances as possible. Do you think that Roberto Martinez is going to play Lukaku without putting players around him? No, of course not. Do you think England are going to do that with Harry Kane? Of course not. I'm still holding on with my picks though. I still think Germany can really do it. Obviously they weren't great against Hungary, but I think if Germany get it together, they'll be fine. France are good, but I can definitely see Germany getting at them. But at this point, we're just looking for the next stage. Terrible thing about the Euros is that I feel like there's so many group stage games, or so many games until I want to see exciting football. Like they've stretched it out with all the third place teams going in. With all the third place teams going through, I feel like the tournament's almost taking longer, but here's me arguing about more football. It doesn't really make sense. Still taking my predictions. I think Foden will be fine. Hasn't been too... it's been really good, but hasn't been really... You're not seeing his impact on score sheets. But Foden's been great when he's played. I think England will get it together. I still do think Germany. That's what I'm taking. Calciopoli episode done. Really appreciate you guys for listening and support. Please keep sharing the podcast. Tell your friends to tell your friends as much as you can. Follow the Instagram page at The Unsigned Manager. Post news about the podcast, trailers for new episodes. You can suggest things in the comment sections. But yeah, just keep sharing, keep supporting, and I'll see you guys next week. Thanks and goodbye.